Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Soldiers of Cinema podcast, episode 13, lesson 14. That's where it gets tricky. I'm Colin McFader, and joining me is, as always, Clark Coffee down in
Hello.
California. How are you doing?
I'm doing awesome. It's a beautiful day. I can look out my window here and see all the way to the ocean. Not that we're close to the
Nice.
beach, but
Yeah.
it is a beautiful day. We actually got some rain last weekend, and
Yeah.
whereas it was smoky, I think the last time recorded, the sky is crisp, and I'm feeling psyched to talk about film and Mr. Herzog here.
Yeah. No, I'm really excited. It's beautiful here, too. Beautiful weather. 20 degrees Celsius in
And
November is very rare for here, so I'm
fantastic,
energized. But today we're going to be
excellent.
talking about, as I mentioned, lesson 14, which is similar to our last episode. It's kind of the second part, I would say, of this kind of acting
I think that's fair. Yes.
duo, which
Yep.
is working with actors on set. So a little bit different from what we talked about last time. Last time we
Right.
talked about the method,
And kind of
whereas
more
this time,
casting, kind of
yeah,
pre-production. Now we're talking about we're in production, we're on set, we've cast our actors, and we're working. Yeah.
exactly, yeah. And it's a really interesting lesson because there's a lot of, as per usual with Herzog, there's some sort of controversy or
Mm.
controversial takes on how he
Yeah.
deals with things, and we'll get into all those details
I mean, that's
as
what
the
makes it so
episode goes.
juicy,
But
right? I mean, if
yeah,
it were
exactly.
right.
Well, I mean, that's what makes him. I think that's what one of the things about kind of studying him as a filmmaker
Well,
is
so
that
thought-provoking,
it's
right?
not just sitting there and going, okay, this is how X makes a movie, and there's their behind the scenes process. It's
Right.
like he's just will like throw some crazy thing out once, and you'll be
It's
like,
fantastic.
oh,
Oh,
okay,
and he has tried so many different techniques, and we're gonna get into some of that here, like hypnotizing
yeah,
actors, for example. Which, I mean, come on, how many directors have done something like that? So
hmm,
it really is like a fantastic, and this is what we love. I mean, we're both fans of Herzog, of course, that's a given, but it's why it's so fun to take a look at his films and his philosophies of filmmaking because. It's really there's such a great canvas there to compare and contrast and kind of make decisions for your own styles and philosophies. Not that you would ever accept all of his. That's never what we're recommending, of course. But it's a great like sounding board or contrast. And acting is something that I know I've mentioned before is near and dear to my heart. It is one of my absolute favorite aspects of filmmaking. I both enjoy acting and directing actors. It is truly one of my greatest joys in filmmaking. So when I'm on set working with actors, that's when I feel like I'm most in it.
hmm.
What about you? Is that just to take a tiny little quick, but
I don't know.
is
I
that
mean,
something? Is it one of your favorite parts, or is that a part
I'm in
that you
between.
worry about?
I
Okay,
really like location. I
okay,
love getting out and one of my desires, not necessarily as a career option, but one of the things I love the most with film is even just going out and getting, nature footage and things
mm,
like that. So I am in between there. I do love working with actors and I love the energy on a set, but there's also times where I think that filmmaking can be very poetic and very solitary,
yeah.
and that's kind of a lot of fun too,
Well, I
and
know that it's
really
kind of like you
introspective.
have kind of not to put words in your mouth, but I get a sense from just knowing you for so many years now that there's kind of like a communion you have with the camera and the image that is
Hmm.
is a really important part of it to you.
Yes, yeah,
So
definitely.
yeah, well, yeah. So right off the bat, and I love. I mean, I just love this. This is a really beautiful phrase, and I completely agree with this philosophy here. Herzog starts this lesson right off the bat, and he says, "Look, there's no stars on set." Now, of course, he definitely works with stars, but what he means
Hmm.
is everybody's equal. There's no stars on set, but whoever's in front of the camera is royalty, even
Hmm.
extras. And I was like,
Yeah, I
you
like
and
how
I
you
were
points that out. Yeah.
yeah, and you and I were briefly talking before this, and I'm like, I have actually done background work for a brief period of time, and I recommend it actually to everybody when you're first starting out, especially if you live in a big market. Doing background work, the barrier to entry is very low.
Hmm.
Well, when I see very low, I mean very low relative to just about doing anything else on a professional film or television
Oh
set.
yeah,
But
I know
but
people who just work in business who
sure, you
on
can.
weekends go
But
and do background work, right? Yeah.
but it can be challenging. I don't mean to misrepresent, especially if you're union. It can actually be hard to even get background work in LA.
Yeah.
but it's a great opportunity to get on a professional set and actually watch the mechanizations, watch people working, see how a pro set operates. It's fantastic experience, and you can be just starting out in your career and work 6 feet away from people at the top of their game. So it's a great
Yeah.
way to get close to people. I digress, but it's so wonderful for me to hear that because most of my experience is that extras are definitely not treated like royalty.
No. No.
They're kind of more treated like cattle, frankly.
Hmm. Cannon
But
fodder.
cannon fire, Toto. but but I really do love this phrase, right? That look, there's no stars, meaning there isn't somebody that's above somebody else, receiving special treatment or whatnot. But whoever's in front of the camera, they're royalty.
Yeah.
And I think
Exactly. Yeah.
it's a wonderful way to kind of phrase this.
And I think
Um,
that my take on that too isn't necessarily that it's like, bend over backwards to serve the
no,
talent, but rather
correct.
that because the image is so sacred. And I
Yes,
don't mean
what
just the
they're
visuals.
doing
I
is
mean that
so
the image, the frame of whether it's film or digital you're shooting on,
right,
that exact moment that you're capturing is sacred, and that so
precious. It's
anybody involved
precious.
in that
Yeah,
is exactly. It's
and
like making a stained glass window. It's like, you could have a sheep in there, but that sheep is now this holy thing and
right.
this beautiful work of art. Yeah.
Great way to put it, right? And that and performances are often they're very fragile things, right? A performance is this fluid, fleeting, vaporous kind of thing that's happening in real time. And I think that we've talked about other ways to protect that space and allow for these fragile, nuanced moments as to occur on camera. You really have to create that sphere of protection for whoever's in front of the camera at whoever it is whenever they are. So I love that. Um,
Hmm.
Herzog goes on to talk about having confidence with your actors. Well, yeah, I would hope so. I mean, if you've done your due diligence, if you have taken the time and the investment in your casting, and certainly, hopefully, by the time you get on set, you still feel good about them.
Yes. Yeah.
Hopefully, you've talked
Although
to
there
them.
have been very famous examples of people being recast, midway
Well,
through production.
certainly,
Yeah.
certainly, and it does happen. It does happen, and we haven't talked about that, and Herzog hasn't talked about that. But I think that's a really good point. If you're ever in a situation where, because look, things happen, right? Or
Hmm.
I don't even want to say, well, you could that it's a mistake in casting, but sometimes situations change. Sometimes you feel like something was a fit, but by the time you get to shooting, you realize it's not. So that definitely can happen, and I think that's a good point. I mean, look, if you're to the point where you have really lost confidence in your actor, I mean, it's like you have, and we all kind of know, right? There's things that happen that kind of ding your confidence a little bit, but you're like, no, 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 it's good. I still trust them. But you
Hmm.
get to a certain breaking point where it's like, okay, now if you don't feel like you trust your actors at all, then probably that's where you have to start looking at, well, should I recast this? Because it's painful. And it can be
Costly.
expensive and time
Yeah.
consuming and everything else. But it doesn't get better the longer you wait. I mean, it's
Hmm.
better to recast somebody in the first week of shooting than it is in the last week of shooting. My goodness,
Especially as soon as you have that inkling, it's
as
like,
soon as, or
yeah.
but an inkling as far as like you've really mulled it over and you've had
Yes.
conversations with
Yeah.
them. And
You
I mean,
shouldn't just, yeah. If they make one little mistake, then you shouldn't be like, all right, they're done.
no, 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 my
But,
gosh, I make a
I think that
hundred
that's
little
the thing
mistakes
that,
every day, so that's not, yeah,
the thing that comes up for me is more personality, right? You
okay.
can, after spending a few weeks with somebody, you usually can have a pretty good gauge on their personality, both positive and negative aspects. And I think that sometimes if those negatives really outweigh the positives, then yeah, you can kind of make a guess there
Right,
of
but
this is not going to
it's
go well.
it's one of these kind of intuitive. Ultimately, it boils down to just your intuition in a sense. I mean,
Hmm.
look at the relationship that Kinski had with Herzog. Of course, it's notorious. We've talked about it numerous times, and it's been the subject of all kinds of myths and stories and everything else. But I mean, certainly their relationship was a complicated and sometimes violent one. But
Yes.
Herzog, his intuition was, okay, yes, this is challenging. And it's often, Kinski is completely a catastrophe on set. And he's, other people are about to quit their positions. This is, horrible. But he stuck with them.
Yeah.
And there's definitely some proof in the pudding as far as the results on film. But everybody's going to have their own points where it may be time to recast.
Yeah.
But Herzog, so hopefully you're going into this with a high level of confidence. You have a rapport with your actors now. You're on set. You've gone through pre-production casting. Perhaps you've rehearsed with your actors. Certainly, hopefully, you've talked with them. You've had an ongoing dialogue since you've cast them, and now you're on set. So hopefully you've got, you're able to read them a little bit. You understand them as human beings and as actors. And so Herzog talks about, having that understanding so that, when you need to kind of keep them safe, and maybe when to have them feel a little bit uncomfortable.
And that can
Um,
be, again, this really does relate to the last episode where it's
yeah,
like, how do you
100%.
ride that very fine line, that very slippery slope of not breaking that trust with your actors,
Right.
but letting them be aware of the type of environment you're trying to create.
Yeah.
Because many actors will legitimately say yes to being uncomfortable or being in not the nicest situations environmentally, like if it's freezing cold out, or if
Right.
it's, of course, to a safe degree.
I mean, especially if
But
it's if it's pertinent to the story, if it's
Yeah,
pertinent to the scene, I think there are limits, but
but I think the
uh,
worst thing you can do is not involve them in that process and
right,
not communicate that with them, because
right,
then you're, again, as we said, this whole communication and trust thing is so vital,
right.
and
And
you're
I
going
think
to
we
lose them if
ended,
you. Yeah.
or at least we talked about, I think, at length about honesty with your performers,
Yes.
and having them be able to opt in, to consciously, knowingly opt into an experience or opt out of experience as opposed to have it just thrust upon them. And of
Hmm.
course, there are, I mean, there are gradients to everything. I think, Herzog talks about, when it may be appropriate, if an actor is feeling a little bit uneasy about a scene, maybe they're feeling a little vulnerable or insecure, but in this scene, the character is vulnerable or insecure or confused.
Hmm.
And instead of kind of coddling the actor and waiting until they're secure, he's like, no, 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 let's do a take, let's go for it. I that kind of stuff makes sense.
It's like, I
And
call it almost like accidentally method.
right,
It's like they're like,
right,
they might not be method actors, but it's essentially the
there
process.
you
And
go.
Herzog does get into method acting later,
He
but
does, and we'll talk about that.
yeah,
Which and
but
and
I do
this is
think that
very
sometimes
interesting.
that is even better, because I think that, like, I almost think that this accidental method
Hmm.
is more effective because it's coming from a natural place. It's not coming from a thought
Mm.
process of, I'm gonna go method. It's coming from a thought process of, damn, I have a lot of stage fright right now. Oh, let's use that. So it's kind of funny how
Well, and it's
the
it's
different
interesting, and I
processes
think
work.
I think actors who are experienced, actors who are trained and experienced are going to understand these
Hmm.
things. And I think because look, they will have worked through this kind of situation 100 times, and so they're going to have an understanding of what's going on here. And there's also kind of a school of thought. I remember one of my old acting teachers. She was like, "Look, everything is part of the story.
Hmm.
How you feel at it, I mean, it's all part of the story. You channel it through there. So and I think most actors have kind of learned to take whatever it is that they're feeling in that moment and realize that, hey, I can use this in the story. I think with some, with less experienced actors, if you're working, or maybe they're not even professional actors, you have to be a little more careful. I think you can still do these kinds of things. You can still use that uncertainty, that vulnerability, but I think you need to let them know what you're doing. Like, hey, explain it a little bit to them. Hey, like, it's okay. You feel nervous, but this is going to be perfect for where we're at with the story and the character right now. Let's
Hmm.
do a couple takes, and so it's just so situation specific. But I think overall, in general, absolutely. I mean, use what's in the air, use what's going on,
Well,
and
it's
channel
just
that
funny.
into the scene.
I've got a little anecdote. When I was in high school, I was doing a short film about Andy Warhol's Factory Girls,
Okay.
and one of the actresses that we had didn't know any of her lines. Like, she came to set and just
Boy.
knew none of them. And it actually wound up working out really well, because there
Okay.
was a very clear, you know, thought process of her when she was sitting there delivering the lines, that it really looked like she was straining to remember them, but it played out as seeming like she was like
Thinking,
nervous and
nervous. Okay,
concerned to talk and
yeah,
concerned to say the wrong thing to this, Andy Warhol lady. So it actually worked out really well for
great.
the
And
like the
you
energy of
guys
the
were able
scene.
to use it, right?
Yeah, and I'd much
And
rather do that than scold someone for
well, for
getting their
sure.
lines or whatever, right? Yeah.
And I think if it's working, I mean, I have an example where unfortunately the opposite happened, right?
Right. Yeah.
Where I was working on a short film. It was one of the first short films that I had ever done here in Southern California. I had recently moved here. I had a lot less experience than I did now, but I was working on this film just as an actor. I was playing one of the leads, and one of the actors who was going to be in a handful of scenes that we were shooting this day didn't show up
Yeah.
and just
Oh,
didn't
geez.
show
Yeah.
up. And that's definitely, that's an issue with the director and producers to not have been on top of that. But
Hmm.
we had a significant role not show up. And so that role was filled with somebody who had very little acting experience. And unfortunately, his nervousness, his vulnerability was not appropriate in these scenes,
Hmm.
and the director had a really difficult time, trying to mold where he was in his current state
Yeah. I was gonna
into
say
an
too.
appropriate performance there, and it actually turned out to be a pretty big deal and had a significant impact negatively on everything that we shot that day, and it actually was pretty nasty.
Hmm.
Um,
I
but
do wonder though if a more experienced director could
I think
have
so.
worked
I
with
think
that.
so. I
Yeah.
think so. Yeah, I think so. But I think this is it was just a case in point of, we've got an inexperienced actor and an inexperienced director.
Hmm.
And so the director was not able to, work with him to kind of channel those insecurities or those fears into because I think you always can, right? It doesn't have to be this very literal connection where it's like, well, the character is nervous. So since you're nervous,
Hmm.
it's going to be fine. I think you can use you can get imaginative, you can get complex, and you can kind of twist that. And this would just be a simple example where you'd say, okay, you're nervous. Now, your character doesn't appear to be nervous. Your character actually appears to be very confident. So, okay, well, what do we do when we're nervous? A lot of people project this veneer of confidence, almost overconfidence, because they're covering up an
Hmm.
anxiety or some feeling that they're not good enough, or there's some self-esteem issues, so they project this like very confident veneer. So let's work on that. I mean, so there's all different ways that that you can channel these kind of energies, but I just don't think the director had the experience. He just hadn't
Yeah.
been in these
It
situations
was it
before.
was
But
a situation where it's like, oh crap, this guy doesn't know any of the lines and doesn't know any of
oh
the
boy, no, it was
performance in
even
it.
worse. Do you want me to tell you the full story just real quick? It was even
Sure,
worse.
sure, yeah,
It was
yeah.
even and again, I want to say, if anybody I've worked with recognizes this story, I think all of us were very inexperienced, and so where I could have been there for this actor or even for this director, I wasn't because I didn't have enough experience. It was just we're all starting out, but
Hmm.
the solution was that this guy was going to have a couple beers and that was going to take away his anxiety for the scene.
Oh, geez, I know
And
where
let
this
me
is going.
just
Yeah.
tell you how that did not work out very well at all.
That's hilarious.
I think instead of like a beer or two, he ended up drinking like a six pack. And so now, on top of being nervous, he was actually intoxicated. And it was a very, very challenging shoot day. Let me just
Oh
say
yeah,
that. But hey, we lived. We went on to fight another
and you
day,
learned from it.
and we learned from it. But anyway, so yeah, look, Herzog doesn't talk about this, but from my personal experience, I would say maybe don't go the liquid courage route
No.
necessarily if your issue is that you have an actor with a lack of confidence. Getting drunk is probably not the best solution for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's hey, and Herzog says, know when to push, but know what your limits are. And that would be like a really good case in point of know what your limits are. Maybe one beer, not six. No.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Oh
That's
my
funny.
gosh. But yeah, look, hey, and this is part of the wonderful world of filmmaking. You got to start somewhere. You have to learn your lessons somehow, and I think the best lessons are learned on set. And
Hmm.
you can take a master class from Herzog. You can listen to these podcasts. You can do all these kinds of things. Watch all this, read a million books and watch a lot of YouTube videos. But look, everybody learns on set. That's where you learn.
And perhaps
Uh,
that even is a pretty decent segue into his next point, which is about
Rehearsing.
rehearsing. Yeah,
Yeah.
which is don't he doesn't like to rehearse or do like a table read
Right.
beforehand, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
And I think again, like
What do you
anything
think's
in this
interesting
medium,
about
there's
that?
there's there's pros and cons.
Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely not his most controversial thing because there's a
No.
lot of
A lot
directors
of
that
yeah.
don't like to rehearse. But I I think it depends on the actors because I think that honestly, I think that the more experienced actors can really benefit from rehearsal time. And this is
Okay.
going to sound almost like it's the opposite of what it should be, but yeah, I think
Okay.
that the more experienced a actor will benefit from rehearsal time because they will
Interesting.
know how to play around with those things and to try new things.
Okay.
Whereas less experienced actors, I would almost rather limit the rehearsal time as much as possible. And the reason for that is because I think that a lot of times with less experienced actor, they overthink things.
Mm-hmm.
Where if you don't give them a chance to overthink and you just basically say go with your very first instinct, it can often come out a lot more natural and a lot more real,
Interesting.
as opposed to if you let them rehearse it for 3
Right.
weeks and they have all these different scene studies and things like that, and then they get onto set and they've got this whole scene overthought in their brain. They're thinking about every single word that they're saying. Um, at least that's been my experience, and that's been my experience
Sure.
both as an actor and as a
Well, I
director.
think that, and I think that's very valid. And I think, you're speaking to, I will generalize it a little bit more. I mean, every actor is going to have their own process and they're going to have their
Mm-hmm.
own baggage. They're going to have their own experience level. And I think that there are pros and benefits to both, but I think there are ways to mitigate. Herzog's greatest fear, and it sounds like yours a bit too, is that if you rehearse, you lose spontaneity. Now, of course, we've talked about at length that Herzog is very much focused on urgency and
Mm-hmm.
spontaneity, and so it makes sense that within his style, his framework, philosophy of filmmaking, that he wouldn't rehearse, that he's gonna err on the side of urgency and spontaneity.
Yes. Yeah.
But I think this is a challenging one, and so I think it depends on you as a director. What are your what do you want your style to be? What is your subject matter? What's the overall tone, feel, etc. of your film? And you may have to take this case by case. You may be working on a project where spontaneity is more important than other considerations. I can say I am sometimes a bit hesitant about I'm kind of a fan of rehearsal, and maybe that's because I've come from a world of theater before I ever worked on camera. And I know as an actor myself, I am a huge fan of a lot of homework. Now, here's the catch. What is homework, though?
Yeah.
If you've got an actor who thinks homework is running lines, you're in trouble.
Or
So
just
if you
doing
have an
impressions of
actor,
his or her favorite actors.
or just that a lot of less experienced actors they put almost all of their time into learning, quote unquote, learning their lines because
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
afraid that when they get in front of camera or on stage, if it's theater, of course, that they're going to forget their lines, and so they're so focused on their lines. Well, sure, say a line 100 times. What's going to happen when you get on camera? You've memorized it by rote, so of course there's not going to be any life in it. You've literally taken all the life out of it, not
It's just
because
become
you
muscle memory.
rehearsed,
Yeah.
but how you rehearsed.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
about how you rehearsed. So for me, I think rehearsal is vital. But for me, rehearsal is not about line memorizations, saying them over and over again. It doesn't have anything to do with lines. It has to do with circumstances, what
And
we
I think
call the
it's
given
time to
circumstances.
experiment too. Like
Well,
I would
and
say that that's the value to me, at least, of
and you
rehearsal is that you
you're
don't have
getting to
that
my
time on
yeah,
set, right?
right. And this is where this is where I'm trying to take this reasoning here. What you call experimenting. So, right, the script is full of what we call given circumstances, right? These are all the variables that are taking place in this story that are affecting these characters. I mean, it's all the story elements. It's all of the background pieces of every character. It's their wants, desires. It's every little thing that has happened to them before, like, and all, these characters have lives that exist well before the time of the script and after. And an actor's homework is thinking of all of these things and creating these memories. So if that's your rehearsal, you call it experimenting, but it's really about seeing how these given circumstances can affect what's going on in the moment of the scene. I hope this is making sense, but
Yeah.
and I think if you've got an experienced actor and that's how they're putting their time into a rehearsal, it has nothing to do with rote memorization. So that spontaneity is there because all they've done is work on the creation of this rich tapestry of memories that they will then come up or won't come up, or how they're going to affect the performance behind the scenes. But it has nothing to do with like, here's how I'm going to say this line and here's how I'm going to say that line and I'm going to
Well,
be
and
angry here and sad there. If you
two experienced
mm,
actors can sit in silence for an hour of rehearsal doing script work and come out with a better rehearsal than two inexperienced actors that are just doing scenes over and over again.
well, doing scenes over and over again is horrible. And so
Yeah.
in that case, I would say, look, if you have actors who that's the only way they know how to work and you can't cast other people, this is what you're limited to, then yeah, I either don't let that like guide their rehearsals, don't let their rehearsals be just reading lines over and over again, running scenes over and over again. Don't let it be that. Guide their rehearsals toward a an analysis of the given circumstances of the script and their character. So that's me. It's obviously pretty different here. Herzog doesn't go into these kinds of details here because it's there's not much time, so he doesn't provide as much nuance. And certainly, I'm not going to speak for him. I of course would never speak for him, but that's my kind of take on it. Maybe
Hmm.
it's just because I have so much more expensive or experience on that actor side. But certainly, if rehearsal means running lines, then oh my goodness, yes, you can take everything out of a scene by running a scene 50 times, just over and over and over. Oh, and it's horrifically boring. Who wants to do
Oh yeah,
that?
you're just gonna wind up hating the
Oh,
subject matter.
oh,
Um,
yeah. I mean, anything loses its meaning if you say it over and over again. I mean,
yeah,
if you just sat there, Cullen, and said the same sentence 50 times in a
it would
row,
sound like Alien Jarble by the
it
end of
would
it.
literally, your brain would just start to turn these sounds into meaningless nothings. I
Yeah,
mean,
we're not Bart Simpson. We're not writing, the thing on the board
right,
60 times.
right. Oh my goodness. Was
And I
was
do
it was
think
it
that
was it Herzog on the Simpsons?
he
Didn't he do
was, and
some voice work
he
on the
was on.
Simpsons?
Yeah, I think he did The Simpsons, and he's done like Rick and Morty and a few different things.
He's in yeah,
Futurama, I
yeah.
think he was on
So
Futurama as well.
great tie-in, Colin. Excellent.
Yeah, there you go. But I also, I mean, the one thing I will say that I do disagree with Herzog on is the table read. I actually enjoy a table read
Yeah.
more as a kind of the perhaps last chance before you really dive deep in to say, okay, you know what, this really isn't working.
Like from a
Um,
writing perspective,
yeah, well, from a
right?
writing and from a casting perspective,
Okay.
if an actor is doing something that's completely out of left field, you can kind of gauge there. All right, can I work with this person and can I kind of
Oh,
steer them in the
interesting.
direction that I'm thinking, or is this going to be a really difficult process just off the
Hmm.
bat? I've had especially with inexperienced actors, um, table reads have gone have just been really enlightening because they've done things that have led to recastings
Oh,
where
wow.
it's like they will
Can I
say
ask?
still.
So, can you dive into that? And the reason I ask is because as an actor in a table read, I never, ever, 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 quote unquote, act at a table
Yeah,
read. It's
yeah.
literally just a reading, so I am never acting.
Oh
Like
no,
it,
exactly, and that's
and so is
exactly what
that
it
what
should
are
be.
you looking at performance in a table?
No,
Like
no,
when
no.
you say
I'm
that it
not
affects
performance.
casting? Yeah.
I've seen people though come into table reads
Okay.
and act their heart out, and
Ah.
I've seen that both go well where somebody's doing that and they're really just experimenting with these lines and it actually
Mm-hmm.
can be really interesting. But I've also seen it to the point where it's like that's complete. That this the characterization here is completely off base. And I think that the reason that's really important to me is that then I can, I'm not immediately, as we talked about before, I'm not immediately going to go, okay, this person's out, I'm firing them. But you can talk to them and you can get a reading from someone like that, especially though with inexperienced actors, because of course, inexperienced actors aren't going to take notes as well. And I don't mean that in a personal like they're insulted. I mean that they just
Don't have the
applying
experience. It's
notes
just
to
not
their yeah
practice. Yeah.
implying notes to their performance is going to be
Right.
more difficult because they, as you said, they don't have the experience. So
It,
sometimes with really inexperienced actors if they do those big table reads.
Well, usually that's the
Um,
only type of actor that would do a big table read.
exactly.
Obviously, like you get into the story as you tell it, and it's not like you've got a flat effect and you're not in the story, of course. But it's certainly not acting. You know,
No, it's
table
not
read is
performance.
definitely
No.
not a performance. And so, yeah, if you've got somebody coming into a table read and they're, given this, an opening day performance kind of situation, I mean, it may just be that they don't understand what a table read is for and what the
Yeah.
etiquette is there.
But I
Um,
do have a specific example too of that happening where it was, again, it was like reading through this thing, and I remember afterwards the producers and I had a conversation, and we were just kind of like, that's completely wrong, and not anything against the actor, but we just realized that it was a complete miscast, and that
mm,
the performance that they, like, the entire read that they had given for this character, just the
hmm
personality that they'd applied to the words was like the, you know, completely way off of
yeah,
what the story needed. And it wasn't only, again, I also want to reiterate that it's not just for personal taste. It's not just me sitting there going, well, I would have said that differently. It's the story. How does the character choices serve the story? And of course, you're never going to get all of that out of a table read. But it can be a really good, and what I've found is a really valuable kind of first line of defense, if that makes sense, where
mm,
you're kind of, you get, some of those things, if some of those problems start coming up in the table read, you really better take a look
interesting.
at what those choices you've made are. At
Interesting.
least
I've
that's
only,
my
yeah,
process. Yeah.
I've only ever used table reads in theater.
Hmm.
I've never used a table read for myself. I've been a part of reads for films, but it was
Hmm.
only ever from a writing perspective. It was
Right.
only
Yeah.
ever, let's hear the words out loud. Let's get a sense of story structure, but more dialogue. Let's see, do jokes land? How do things sound when they're actually up off the page? So that's
Yes.
the only way that I've ever used a table read. In theater, it's different. It's a little more of a tradition, but they're also helpful in the sense that they can bring a team together. It's an opportunity to start to develop rapport. Now, especially my theater experience, most of it was an ensemble cast, so you're building rapport amongst all the actors in that time that you're doing a table read, and it's just kind of an excuse to do that. But yeah,
Hmm. Hmm.
I've never seen a table read used for anything other than more of a writer's tool for film before. But of course, everybody has a different way of working for sure.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, so over rehearsing, we've discussed that. It's interesting. This is where it could get a little, maybe slightly controversial. From Herzog, he talks about training, and he uses an example. This is intriguing to me. I think there are a lot of variables here.
Hmm.
I disagree with Herzog on this a little bit. So he uses the example of Marlon Brando, and
And
he thinks
Strasbourg. Yeah.
and he thinks that Brando was a better actor before he received his training from
Right.
Strasbourg.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that there are a lot of variables that led Marlon Brando to be disenchanted with acting. And I think that had more to do because I don't think he ever actually lost his craft, ever. I think that he remained an exceptional actor. That ability was there throughout his entire career. I think his willingness to
Yes.
put in any work, and I think would diminished. And I think that he became very disheartened with the industry, and I think he found less and less joy from doing it as time went on. And I think those things had an impact on his temperament on set and his performances. But I would argue that I just don't know that I agree that it was because he received training that he became a worse actor. I do understand the sentiment that
Hmm.
Herzog's getting at, but I even kind of disagree with that a little bit to an extent. But let's talk about it. So
Yeah.
basically, Herzog's saying that that if an actor focuses too much on background, motivation, the internal life of a character, um, that it can actually make actors difficult. Now, it's interesting that he uses that verbiage, right? He doesn't actually really say, well, it makes an actor worse. He says
Hmm.
it makes them difficult.
Yes,
And,
which is
and, and
funny because it's very, again, very
which is
Herzog.
funny, right? And Herzog is, he uses some, goes a little further in his example, and he says it's, an actor becomes so focused kind of on these internal issues that they lose track of some of the just base fundamental external logistics of acting, like hitting your marks, staying in frame, finding your light, etc., etc. And I could certainly
Which
see
to
where
me though
that could be the
is
case.
again, it's one of these things where Herzog is filled with contradictions.
Yes.
Because before this, if anybody had told me that, do you think that Herzog cares about the internal work of an actor more than the actor hitting the mark, I would say he cared more about the internal work of the actor.
Right.
But I find that it's really interesting that here he sort of points out that he's more workmanlike here, if anything. Like
Hmm.
he's more like, we've got a job to do on set, and if you're messing up those cues and things like that, then which is really interesting because then because
Yeah.
you'll find places where Herzog talks about filmmaking completely differently. Like when he talks about camera, he's like, yeah, you know what? I don't care if my camera operator goes off and finds the shot himself and moves his arm right into the shot and looks, and it's like it's very funny that he's got again these kind of internal
Well,
contradictions.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think there are some seemingly contradictory things here, but I think it also falls in line with a lot of other things he says. And I mean, this is kind of the very nature of Herzog as a filmmaker, is this seemingly kind of paradoxical duality that exists here. I mean,
Hmm.
clearly, Herzog will say over and over and over again, he doesn't want to analyze his films. He doesn't want to he doesn't actually want to analyze his internal creative process. He doesn't want to question it. He doesn't want to know about it. And every his process as he describes it in this masterclass and in other places is all about just going, just go go
Hmm.
go, do. I don't want to get in my own head. I don't want to mess up my flow. I don't want to overthink it. Overthinking it will kill it. So this is his push towards urgency, spontaneity. Whether when he talks about writing, he's talking about his actors. So I think he really does come from a place of, look, this acting's not therapy, filmmaking's not therapy. This is, that's not what that's about. And we're not trying to find yourself in the process. You're not trying to like uncover
Your inner
your
demons. Yeah.
emotional demons or issues, right? That's not what this is about. Um, so that falls in line. This falls in line with that very much, where it's like, okay, well, I don't want my actors to do that either. I don't want my actors to get overly analytical. I don't want them to get so far inside themselves that they turn themselves inside out and are kind of just this paralyzed puddle on the floor. Now, from my experience, I can speak to this a little bit, and I'd be really curious to know other people's thoughts, but not just my experience, but I've seen this mirrored in other actors' experiences that I've known and studied with and kind of grown up in the business with, and seen known them for a decade or more time and kind of seen a similar trajectory with them. And that's this, is that I think, and there's actually a model of learning which goes along with this, which I'll probably screw up, but basically it's like there's a point where you don't know what you don't know. So you just like run headlong into it. And we call this sometimes beginner's luck, but it's like you're not self-conscious because you don't know what you don't know. So you're just like, woohoo, you run on out there and do it. And sometimes there can be a wonderful quality to that, right? You're not self-conscious, you're not inhibited, you don't know that you don't know things. So you just
Hmm.
jump in and go for it. And
Hmm.
there can be a real quality to that. Then when your next step of learning is where it's like, okay, I've just realized I don't know anything. Holy crap. And now you're filled with self-consciousness, and you're trying to learn. You're like, I don't know anything. How can I,
It's like the Dunning-Kruger effect.
yeah, okay. Is that what, explain that one to
Well,
everybody.
that's the one where it's like the less, there's a kind of what do you call it? A mathematical formula for, when you know very little about something, people who know very little about things, they think that they're experts. And then as
Okay.
you learn more, your perceived knowledge goes like, plummets because then you
Okay.
realize that
You don't.
you don't know anything.
Great.
Yeah.
And so in this first place that I described, this we don't know what we don't know. It's an unconscious place, right? Because you're not conscious of anything because you
Hmm.
don't even know. So then but it's an unconscious incompetence. Then you move to a place of conscious incompetence, and now you're okay, I don't know anything about this. And so you're filled with fear. You're like, okay, I have to go learn. There's all this stuff I don't know.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and then you move to a place of competence where now you've spent time learning, but it's still conscious. It's like, okay, I've learned all this stuff. I know that I know. Okay.
Hmm.
And you're still, so both of these two modes are a conscious mode. You're in yourself. You're like concerned about your own competency. You're analyzing your own level of understanding or lack thereof. It's a very conscious in your head experience, which is unfortunate because acting is not about that.
Hmm.
Acting is not about a conscious, planned thing. But there's a fourth area of learning. It's we don't know we know.
Yes.
And that's where your competence becomes unconscious.
Hmm.
And that is where you want to be. So I disagree with Herzog a little bit, or maybe in my own mind, at least for myself, I'm refining it, which is this. I would rather have an actor who doesn't know they don't know
Yeah.
than to have one who's in their head to the point of paralysis, where they're
And thinks that they know everything. Yeah. Yeah.
in an incompetent or even competent place of, but it's a consciousness. They're consumed with their own self, with their own inner mechanizations and workings, and so they're kind of hampered in their ability to pay any attention to these outside things. But if you get to a competent place of unconsciousness, and so what I like try to tie this all into the studying acting thing is this, is that maybe a person who's never studied acting might be easier to work with than a person who's just started and they're steeped into it, and they're
Hmm.
extremely conscious about this whole process and everything that's going on. But I don't agree if you take an actor who's been through this process and they've come out the other side and now they have internalized and made like a muscle memory kind of, if you will, of their craft. Every time I want that actor. I want a studied
Yeah.
actor, but who's internalized it and now it's unconscious.
You know what's funny too? So we've spoken briefly about I went to a drama high school,
Mm-hmm.
like a specialized, theater
Fame,
school,
Colin
and
wants to live
it was
forever.
Glee. Yeah. But no, I think that it's interesting that you can actually, and many people who went to the school as well and taught there and stuff like that will say the same thing, which is you'll get really great performances out of the grade nines. The
Mm-hmm.
grade 10s and 11s are trying so hard
Yeah.
that you
Yep.
wind up losing those great performances, and then
Yes.
it's not until you get to grade 11 or grade 12
Right.
that those you almost return to
They
that
come back,
infancy, and it's like this weird.
but
um
with more nuance though. With
exactly, but I
more.
mean that's what I mean, where Kurosawa has a great quote, and it's not specific to acting, but it's specific
Mm-hmm.
to artists and stuff, and he says that um there's this old Japanese saying or something like that, which is that as you go through life, you begin as an infant, and that is your most knowledgeable and your most, immersive time of your life. And then
Mm-hmm.
you go through life and you try to make decisions, and you're always thinking things. And then by the end of your life, you return to this phase where you go, I've learned all I can. And you return to the infant phase that you are
Mm-hmm.
now just taking in knowledge again, and you're learning and you're actively learning. And I think that that's so, not
Beginner's
only is that
mind.
poignant to filmmaking and art in general, where it's like you get to a certain point where there's definitely that kind of pro mature kind of thing where you're an amateur but you're trying to be professional, where you think you know everything, and then you get to the point where you realize how little you know, and it's exactly what you're talking about. But
Yeah.
it's funny that it breaks down almost exactly into the grades in
Yeah.
this high school, which is that the people who are coming in grade 9 who have sometimes no acting experience, sometimes they've just got kind of a little bit of a natural kick for it.
Mm-hmm.
They wind up giving incredible performances. And, there's obviously some tons for them to learn. But then as you get to grade 10 and 11, these middle years, you get this, not necessarily an arrogance in the sense that it's
No,
a
it's a it's
rudeness,
just a
but it's a,
consciousness. It's a
yeah,
self-consciousness.
this assumption that you are becoming an expert when you're not near it,
Yep.
which I think
Yep.
is really interesting. I think it's a really interesting way to look at it.
Yep. And so that's, so I would differ in Herzog, but I can totally understand, his experience, which is, hey, I've worked with actors who have been training, and wow, they're really difficult, and
Yeah.
they're just focused on this whole internal process. But filmmaking is not just your internal process, man. Like, we got to get stuff done. And I do want to add this too. I mean, you mentioned that these ninth graders, these beginners, were able to occasionally give exceptional performances. But I want to say what they likely couldn't do would be to deliver consistent brilliance.
Yeah,
And
consistent
that's
or an explanation of how
right.
they got to that point.
And that's where you get when you actually have gone through all of these the process of learning, and you've come out the other side where you have an unconscious competence. It's consistency. It's that
Mm-hmm.
you can bring a brilliance to that take after take after take after take, and in different ways, with different shadings, with different gradients. So my personal experience is a little bit different than Herzog here, but I can totally understand that for a big bulk of experiences where it could be the case that having
Mm.
had some training is going to make an actor much more difficult than otherwise.
It's also again to say that there are trade-offs too, and that some people will go through years and years of acting training and they'll still come out, not really get all that
Well,
great.
of course, let's be
That's
right. I mean, look, it's of course we're generalizing in we're generalizing in a significant way, and this, of course, would apply to any person in any position in any
hmm
art or trade or anything else. Not everybody is brilliant, and even after an extreme amount of study, not everybody is going to be brilliant.
hmm
So of course that's kind of an understood, but so we'll move on to a couple last things here that Herzog talks about when it comes to actors in this lesson. He talks a little bit about controlling your actors, and it's like I always love it when Herzog we get a chance to be reminded of one of like Herzog's wacky Kinski stories,
Yes,
and
yes.
this is another instance of that. And I think I hope I'm not going to misquote this, but I'll kind of try to summarize for our listeners here. And I think Herzog tells a story about how they're out in the Amazon, and and I think he's talking about a Gary, and there's this kind of morning ritual of like the distribution of coffee, and so somebody goes around and brings coffee to all the huts here where all the cast and crew are staying, and it just so happened, not for any nefarious reasons whatsoever, that Kinski was last on this coffee distribution chain. And of course, he like flies into a huge fit. Oh my God, I'm the star of the film, and I get coffee last. What's going on here? Um, and so instead of trying to sit down and rationalize with Kinski and say, okay, hey, look, it wasn't on purpose. It just so had we just went by order of hut. Like, nothing was implied, or, all this kind of stuff. Herzog just like runs over, grabs like the last piece of chocolate. I mean, they're out in the Amazon, and
Yeah.
this is the 70s. And it's like, something like this was like the highest prize to have on set. The small piece of chocolate's all that remained. And Herzog just walks right up in front of Kinski and just takes a huge bite, like stuffs all the chocolate in his face. Kinski shuts up. I mean, it's like,
Oh, yeah, it's so
it's kind
good.
of hysterical. I mean, it's just a funny, it's just another funny lesson. I love that Herzog's filled with all these little parables, if you will, and of course you can like read your own meaning into all of these things. But sometimes, and I've experienced this too. I have totally experienced this. Sometimes what you think is a rational way to communicate with somebody might not be the best way to do so.
hmm
We are often not rational people. We often, respond emotionally, and it just so happened in that instance, Herzog was very intimate with Kinski. He knew his psyche. He'd worked with him for a long time, and he was right on the money with that. Um,
Yes. Nailed it.
so,
Yeah.
I think Herzog at numerous points he has this saying, know the hearts of men, and of course he means people, men and women. But I think this is a good instance of that, and I think all of us, we constantly working on your intuitive abilities to read people and understand. But that's just a funny story. It cracks me up. But then he has another great story. That classic scene in Aguirre near the end when he's talking about, that he's kind of just like got this God complex, right? He's almost like turning, he's like, the earth will shudder under my feet and birds will fall from the sky. And he's got this. It's amazing performance. He actually looks. I don't know if you've seen it recently. I just watched it a little bit to remind myself of the scene, and
hmm
he like is delivering this into camera. He totally like.
Yeah. No, yeah.
I had forgotten about that. I mean, he's looking directly into the camera, which of course is usually something you would never ever ever do. But it's an extremely intense and effective performance. Um, and apparently Kinski wanted to rant and rave and give this huge dynamic performance. And Herzog said, no, I don't think that's the route we want to go. And of course, fight ensued. And I think Herzog says that he had to wear Kinski down over hours and hours
Yeah.
and hours to finally get this performance that was subdued. That he literally just had to like take the energy out of Kinski so that that's like the only way he could get this performance was to just wear him down to the point where he had no more energy left to, to do what he wanted to do instead of what Herzog wanted him to do.
Yeah.
But just interesting stories there, and I think it just speaks so much to the wide-ranging like
The
skills that
world
a
of acting.
director needs, or it's like,
Yeah, or the
you've got
world
to
of filmmaking.
right. It's like, problem solver, psychologist, like, therapist,
Hmm.
counselor. Like, it sometimes is pretty amazing. Especially when you're dealing with somebody as wild as Kinski. Now, I have never worked closely with somebody that was that wild, so I don't have that experience. But certainly when it comes to having to work with great nuance and kind of almost be like a counselor to actors, I've definitely been
Hmm.
there.
Well, I mean, that's why it's so important. I mean, that kind of wraps up the whole thing too in a nice bow of some of the previous lessons as well, which is why I think it's so important that you don't just sit in Video Village all day and
Absolutely.
watch from a screen. That like you should be there, in the trenches with them and be
Yeah.
working with the entire crew as a unit and not as some sort of glorified TV station.
Right, right. Or like air traffic controller back there,
Yes. Yeah.
like your headphones on and your like monitors in front of
Yeah.
you.
Exactly.
Right. And this is, it's interesting. So in this lesson as well, Herzog describes his experience where he hypnotized actors
Hmm.
for the
Yes.
film Heart of Glass. And it's funny. I'm trying to think, well, how in the world can I even turn this into something that you might be able to glean some information from as a filmmaker? But I certainly never hypnotized a cast. I can't imagine myself
Speak for
ever.
yourself.
Speak for. Have you done it?
No. 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 No.
I've never done it. I can't imagine that I would ever even see myself doing it. And frankly, I'm almost like I don't even know if I believe that hypnotizing is a real thing.
Hmm.
But it's
Yeah.
super interesting story.
And the
And if
performances are super interesting from it too.
well, and so let's talk about it. We can talk about that a little bit, but just in case our listeners, need a little bit more background on this. So for Herzog's '76 film Heart of Glass, he hypnotized his cast, as I understand it, his entire cast, and he would kind of put them under before a scene and then bring them back, in between takes or whatnot. But the story, and it's been a while since I've seen this as well, but the story is I think there's this small town who survived on this very special technique of glass blowing, and that master glass blower dies, I think. And so now this town is lost, and then they're in this like limbo of like no purpose, right? And to represent this kind of strange dreamlike lost state this town is in, he hypnotized everybody, and it is certainly unique. I'm personally a little bit kind of on the fence about what I think of the performances, but what's your take, Cullen?
I mean, it certainly makes for an interesting viewing experience, without a
Sure.
doubt. And I think really that is the goal there, at least in my
Yeah.
mind, is that it's not necessarily to get a realistic
No, very
depth of
symbolic.
performance, but rather
Right.
it's about this. I mean, this trance-like, almost meta behavior that all these villagers go into.
Yeah.
I mean, I think again, yeah, it just becomes this very interesting. And there's a lot of movies that do this to the audience that are slow burning and almost try to hypnotize the audience. And I feel like it has that same atmosphere. I haven't
Mm.
seen the full thing. I've only seen the select bits that are
Well, we're
shown.
gonna have to
But
rectify that when we do our
exactly, I know.
episode where we cover this film there,
I'll have to get
Cullen.
hypnotized and watch it.
Right. Well, right. How about that? I'll hypnotize you. You hypnotize
Yeah.
me. Then we'll watch it together, and then we
Yep.
will do the episode while still under
Oh,
hypnosis.
that'd be there. We go. First
Woo!
podcast ever under hypnosis.
I can't wait.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I think it's just one of those wonderful things. Look, if you love it, you don't love it. I certainly think it's interesting, and what I do love about it is that his willingness to try these things, to go to these places, is just fantastic. I mean, that's inspirational to me. I may not have the desire to hypnotize a crew or a cast, but so what? I
Trying
think
new
it's
things. Yeah.
awesome that he did. Yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
awesome that he did, and I totally applaud that. and
And if it
it's
ever came
certainly,
up in a project for me where I was like, it would help,
yeah,
then
there you go.
I'd
I mean,
certainly look into it. Yeah.
as long as you're like treating your crew ethically, of course,
Yeah.
you've got their buy-in. It's not something you're doing behind their
Oh
back,
yeah.
or
Go into their trailer in the morning and yeah,
I
play
just
some
imagine.
speakers.
I just imagine, like, what is it like in those old movies? They swing the stopwatch.
Yeah, yeah.
You're
You are
getting
feeling sleepy. Your
sleepy.
eyes are feeling heavy. Yeah, that'd be funny.
But it is, and I highly recommend, listeners out there, if you've not seen the film, check it out. I
Yeah.
can't think of any other film that claims to have been, shot with a hypnotized cast. It is very unique, and I will tell you, it. I mean, it definitely, you almost start to feel hypnotized. I mean, it is like it's like this trance-like quality. So very, very intriguing. On
Yeah.
the flip side, so on the total opposite of hypnotizing actors, Herzog then jumps to talking about letting your actors loose, and I love it. He's like, "Turn the hog loose." Do
Yes.
the accent. Do the accent, Colin.
Turn the hog loose.
But he talks about specific actors that he has a lot of confidence and trust in, and
Hmm.
after he feels like he's gotten the takes that he needed that were on script, then he's like, I think there might be a little bit something more there, and he lets his actors. Like I said, a few he mentioned specifically, Kinski and Cage, but he lets them improvise some.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
what's your thoughts, just real briefly? Is improvisation something that you utilize, and if so,
If
how?
the
And
actor's good, I mean, if it seems
yeah,
like something that, and I actually did, I acted in a movie recently, just a short,
hmm
with the
one of the new
colleagues of
Marvel
mine.
movies coming out, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
You're-
I am, the new Spider-Man.
Well,
Um,
actually, it's funny
but
that you say, Colin. Just let's pause for a moment. It's funny you say that because I feel like you could kill that role. You totally. There's something about the guy that plays Spider-Man that reminds me of you, or vice versa.
that's funny.
I mean
No,
this
I'm
in
not in
all
Marvel,
compliment.
unfortunately. I'm not getting those millions and millions of dollars.
Well, I'll
Otherwise,
tell you
I'd be
what. If
putting
you
it to
ever
much
do
better
get
use.
cast, if you ever do get cast as Spider-Man, I think our ratings will skyrocket for this
Yes,
podcast.
I'm
So
sure.
that would be awesome. I'm all for
Yeah.
it. But sorry to
Um,
interrupt. So
no,
you were.
no, but so I was in this short film, and again, very close friends with the director and stuff like that. And she wrote the script out,
Mhm.
and I basically just went to her with the script and said, "Can I just throw out all the dialogue that you've written?" And not in an insulting way, but I sort of said, "Can I just
Not in an
improvise the
insulting way.
entire thing?" And she said, "Yeah, sure." And she
Oh
gave me
wow.
that trust, and it turned out it was a lot of fun to film, and
Oh, interesting.
it was just very, very. I mean, it was a sort of a comma dramedy type thing, so it
hmm
wound up working.
And this is you
But no,
knew
it
that
was,
you were friends. You had a
yes, yeah.
relationship
I
with.
don't
You were
think I'd
friends
ever
with
go
the
to a director I
director.
didn't
Yeah.
know and go. And
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I also don't act professionally, so I don't think I'd ever be in that position to do so.
Right.
But no, it was funny. But I have, again, it depends on the actor. Had I, have I ever used improvisation? I can't really say that I have much. Yeah,
I
I can't really
definitely
think of a
have.
time when
Yeah.
I have.
I mean, I think I've used it sparingly for sure. Especially, I mean, there are definitely times, and Herzog has spoken to this in a previous episode where, for whatever reason, just a line is just like marbles in an actor's mouth, and for whatever reason, it's just not working. And it could be that the line is really clunky, or it could just be that the actor has not been able to orientate themselves to the line in a way that it makes sense for them.
Yes.
And sometimes the best way around that is to just allow the actor, take the essence of what that line was, and allow that the actor to improvise that.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and again, I will go back to. I just want to reiterate. I think the best improv actors are, in my experience, are those actors who really understand what the acting homework is,
Yeah.
where they really build a depth and breadth of memories of using the given circumstance of the script. And because they've not planned and canned, right? They've not planned a performance. It's not about line readings. It's not about, I need to be angry in this line and sad in this line. Their work is actually always improv. That's the wonderful thing about a
Yeah.
great actor, is that
It's
it's always
it
improv.
should be from the brain, that's part of the brain that feels natural, not from the part of the brain that's memorized lines.
Right. And so, and maybe we can have a podcast where we go into more depth here. Obviously it's something that I'm really
Hmm.
passionate about. I spend a lot of time on myself, but I think that great actors are actually always improvising. They're just
And
improvising with the lines.
what's
But
funny too is just before we wrap up,
yeah.
I I remember last week I mentioned in the kind of techniques of acting episode, the idea that when I was in that play
Hmm.
with a good friend of mine, that I found that we gave better performances off of each other if she was really angry at me before we started. And it was this kind
Oh
of funny
yes.
relationship between that.
Right.
And I want to say that a lot of theater work comes down to improv, sometimes to save your ass. The first
Oh
time that we did
yes.
that play,
Oh boy, I've been
um,
there.
the we what we found out was that we did not receive a huge chunk of the script. We'd
Oh.
never rehearsed, and so we had like 2 days to learn this huge chunk of the script that we just
Uh-huh.
never received before. Literally 2 days. That's not even an
Mm.
exaggeration. And of course, we didn't. There's no way that you can, wholeheartedly memorize that much, or even
Oh,
get
I
familiar with
beg to
that much
differ, sir, but
script in.
I beg to differ, but we'll talk about that later. But
Well,
I
with the
have
limited rehearsal time that we had
yeah.
probably an hour and a half a day, so we had 3 hours to basically get
Okay.
something like
But
25
I will
pages.
just say it's surprising. It's surprising how
Yes.
much you can memorize if you don't memorize by rote. But yes, a
Yeah,
topic
yeah.
for a different. So you've
Um,
gotten this big chunk and you have very little
so
time.
we get on stage though. It's the opening night, and um, it was one of those things where it's like there's like 6 points in the play that are very similar dialogue wise, and they're very easy to get confused.
Hmm.
And what happens? Well, one of the lines was mismatched, and it just didn't make sense in
Hmm.
that context. It was
Hmm.
at a point where the line that was said after I had realized that my dad had died, and that was blah blah blah. So it
Oops.
made no sense that revelation was supposed to come way later, and it hadn't
Yep.
happened yet. And me and her wound up, and I think most of this is owed to the fact that we were really good friends and that we knew each other very well and had acted so much together. Improvised the hell out of the entire show. It was probably like 50 minutes of straight improv
Oh
to
my
get this thing
gosh.
done.
Good for
And we
you.
wound up, it was in a competition, and we wound up moving on the festival and getting, pretty far in it, which was hilarious considering that our first show, our first opening night was primarily an improvised. And I just remember we were just on the stage like crapping our pants. Like I was looking at
Uh,
her and she was like, and luckily we didn't play it off, but you could just tell from each other
yeah.
that we were both like, we've got to
Yeah.
get through this. And it was almost the adrenaline, I think, that really saved us there. That it was just suddenly we were like, all right, we got to improvise. That's,
There
there's
you
no
go.
turning around here. We can't save this. So, but we wound up doing pretty well. So,
Yeah. Well, and it's one
but
of
I
the
think that
things
that's
that
the
really
thing is that,
separates theater from film, of course, is
yeah, and
that
that's what I mean is
yeah.
that film actors with that theater experience can often be really, really valuable because you can,
Yeah.
there's such differences in theater and film acting, but there's some things that can carry over super well that you don't
Yeah.
really touch on in, for an actor who's strictly trained for film may not
Mhm.
even really realize or get the experience of, which can be really neat.
For sure. Well, sir, I think we have come to the end of another episode. Lucky number 13. Everybody out there, I want to thank you so much for listening along. We're happy to have you here. We thoroughly enjoy doing this, and we hope that you thoroughly enjoy listening. So, Cullen, thanks again for a wonderful hour and 3 minutes here.
Yes. Yeah.
And I look forward to our next episode, which is going to be, if I'm not mistaken, sound.
Yep. Sound.
Exciting, cool.
Yeah.
And this will be neat. We spent so much time talking about the visuals, about acting, and we've really not touched sound in any way
No, not yet.
that I can think of
Which
in any of these episodes. So I'm really excited to look into this. I think this is an area that a lot of beginning filmmakers neglect. I know I had to learn so much about this.
Oh God.
And
yeah.
still do, and it's so important. It's so important. So I'm excited for this one. But until then, everybody, hope you have a wonderful week, and we will see you next time.
Yep. Bye bye, everyone.